Many people are thinking we'll all own electric vehicles in 10 years' time, but I'm not so sure. I believe there's a better solution than electric vehicles, at least for the foreseeable future, and it's not fuel cells. It's more practical, it's already available, and it'll help save the planet. But who knows, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, so listen to the video and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subject. Hopefully we'll all learn something about it. So anyway, are EVs a fad? Hybrids launched in the late 1990s with the Prius. They're not EVs, but they got better fuel economy. They were better for those who worried about the environment and about as good as you can get at the time if you wanted to do something that was being green, for a better word. Today, I'm guessing many people feel about hybrids as they did about diesels in the 1980s. They cost a bit more, but they save you money in the long run, so there's a cut-off point where you make money. It's less of an environmental thing that you're buying a hybrid for, it's more a cost saver. Then, of course, plug-in hybrids launched, famously with the Chevrolet Volt in around 2010, also known as the Vauxhall Opel Ampera. This seemed to be the best of both worlds. An electric motor gave the car 40 to 50 miles range, and if you wanted to go further, the petrol engine kicked in and you could refuel it whenever you liked. You can recharge when you get home, even with a regular socket, because the draw was so little. You're only charging about 40 or 50 miles, and you can do that through just a regular socket. You don't need special electric infrastructure. And with many commutes being less than 50 miles, you may not ever have to refuel. I have some friends who had a Chevy Volt and they only did short trips every day, and so they never ever ended up using any fuel. So after a while, like 6 or 12 months, the engine actually automatically kicked in to try and prevent the fuel from going stale because it was just getting so old. The downside, of course, is you're paying for a car that has both an engine and an electric drivetrain, and that includes maintenance of both things, and maintenance of an engine is a lot more than maintenance of an electric vehicle. But a plug-in hybrid seemed to be a good compromise. It was good for the environment, there was no range anxiety, you didn't need to have a consistent place to charge it, and you can easily charge 40 to 50 miles when at the supermarket, for example. But then Tesla and Nissan came along with practical electric vehicles. People who cared about the environment and early adopters switched from hybrids and plug-in hybrids to electric vehicles. And of course, a Tesla was cool. In fact, electric vehicles in general were cool, whatever cool of course meant. And not just being cool, but in some cases they could end up being quite a good deal. For example, Nissan were offering the Leaf as a $200 per month lease. And they were claiming, and you could certainly make the argument, that if you spend more than $200 or $300 a month in fuel, then the amount of money you spend on fuel versus the amount you would spend on electricity meant that after paying $200 a month for the lease, you're essentially getting a free car. But some early electric vehicles weren't as practical as they could be. For example, the Leaf only had an 80 to 100 mile range, and finding a charge point in the early days was pretty hard. One day I came home to find a Toyota RAV4 electric vehicle plugged into an outlet on the outside of my house. And that's because the person who owned it was almost home and couldn't get home because the car stopped, and so they had to emergency charge on my house. And they were very apologetic and it was very nice. But anyway, it was quite a surprise to see someone charging at my house. But electric vehicles have now, of course, become more practical. They generally have longer ranges. 300 miles isn't uncommon. There are way more charging stations, and of course it's much easier to use. But electric vehicles still have practical problems for some people. For example, if you can't recharge overnight, it's very impractical. For example, if you live in a flat or an apartment, or you park by the side of the road and you can't just take a cable and from your window in your front room and sort of, trail it across the pavement to the road. It's a little impractical. Maybe you can charge at work, maybe you can charge at a car park, but for many, this isn't practical today. And the build out of having a big charge infrastructure with charge points everywhere is going to take a long time. Now, electric vehicle sales are taking off, but they're still very, very small compared to regular internal combustion engine sales. We're on the start of the adoption curve. So if you imagine DVD player sales, at the start there were just a few early adopters who spent a lot of money on a DVD player and DVD discs because they really wanted it. But then as things got cheaper, then we moved into the mass market where everybody bought a DVD player, and suddenly it got to have a high adoption rate, just like many other technologies. There's a lot of people thinking the same thing is going to happen to electric vehicles, but that's not guaranteed. So it happened for DVDs, but it didn't happen for Laserdiscs. They were a very similar technology. People thought they were going to do very well, but they were only used by really early adopters. They didn't take off. Well, the same may happen for electric vehicles. At the moment, we just don't know. However, one outlier there, of course, is Norway, where 80% of cars sold in 2022 were electric vehicles. And you might think, okay, well, Norway's just sort of ahead of the curve and every country's going to go like that. But there are very special cases for Norway. The Norwegian government has lowered taxes to keep the prices of electric vehicles down. Yes, other countries have also done that. They've also raised taxes on internal combustion engine cars with a pollution tax. And also Norway has very cheap electricity. 96% of electricity in Norway comes from hydroelectric dams, so it's very cheap for them to produce electricity. So it's clear that economic factors are an important consideration for Norwegians. Of course they are. Electric cars are cheaper than internal combustion engine cars, and like everybody else in the world, if there's something that's cheaper, then they're going to buy something that's cheaper than something that's more expensive. But having said that, the rise of companies like Tesla has worried many car companies, particularly luxury brands, because Tesla is taking sales from companies like BMW and Mercedes and companies like that. There's a big bet today from some of these large car makers that the world is going to very quickly go electric. And that's backed by governments and US states who are putting legislation for zero emission vehicles by 2030 or 2040 or periods like that. So Volkswagen, Ford, General Motors, BMW and Volvo are just some of the companies that are betting big. But this is just a bet. Will electric vehicles gain mass adoption? Norway, as I said, is in some respects is very much an outlier. Not every country is going to slap large taxes on internal combustion engine cars and give large tax credits for electric vehicles. Petrol and diesel is cheaper in other parts of the world than Norway, and electricity is more expensive in other countries. Electric vehicle owners still need to charge their cars overnight, or battery technology needs to allow for very rapid charging, maybe 5 minutes. So if you go to a electric vehicle station, the new equivalent of a petrol station that you can charge up in 5 minutes, or maybe you can do it at a supermarket or something like that. But governments seem to be hoping that these technological problems will be fixed by 2030. But there's no guarantee that fast charging or things like that will ever happen. They're just hoping it's going to happen, and they're looking at the path of how charging speed is improving and hoping it's just going to get better and better. There's no guarantee this is going to happen. And of course, governments can legislate all they like to force customers to switch to electric vehicles, but if the electorate don't like it, they'll vote for change. And politicians can very rapidly change these rules if the voters are saying that they should change things. Look at the electric vehicle laws that California made in the 1990s but then repealed. There's no guarantee that these rules that force people to use electric vehicles by 2030 or 2040 are actually going to stick. I'd argue that the majority of car buyers aren't going to spend more money on a car which is less practical just to save the environment. So just why are customers buying electric vehicles today? There's not actually that many studies of people asking that question, but in 2021, Auto Pacific asked new car buyers if they were looking for an electric vehicle, and if they said yes, then they asked them, remember these are early adopters, they asked them, well, why are you looking at an electric vehicle? The number one reason they said was it was an environmental decision. But the next thing on the list was EVs are the way of the future. Well, that's a silly answer. In the 1950s, flying cars were the way of the future, at least that's what people thought. But that's not a reason to go out and buy one. So I don't know, I don't think that's really a great answer. It smacks of people sort of jumping on the bandwagon of something that they think is cool. They also said that the cost of fuel was also a consideration, but with electric vehicles costing more than internal combustion engine cars, particularly in 2021, that's a complex argument to make at a dealership. It's easy when you buy a regular car. You buy a car, then you know how much it's going to cost for fuel. But if you buy, particularly if you purchase a car outright, an electric vehicle outright, it's going to cost a lot more, but then you're told, oh, it's going to be a lot cheaper to use the electricity over a large period of time. That's a complex argument to make at a dealership. It's not impossible, it's just really nuanced, and it's a difficult thing to try and get people excited about EVs. That's not to say people aren't already excited about EVs, but it's slightly difficult. I'd argue that this Auto Pacific survey doesn't really tell us very much about if electric vehicles will gain mass adoption. Remember, they're talking to early adopters, and they're talking about trying to save the planet, but I bet, again, that there's a good percentage of customers who wouldn't pay more to save the planet. In fact, there's many people on the internet that spout that electric vehicles don't even help save the planet. And of course, this was done in 2021 when Teslas are cool and there's a whole fanboy halo element around them. So are people just buying electric vehicles because they're cool? Well, anyway, that's my case for electric vehicles. But in my opinion, we've been overlooking plug-in hybrids.
Breathe, socket. Just breathe. We know it's intimidating. Instant torque, top speed of 100 miles an hour, that's one serious machine. But you can do this. Any socket can. The Volt only needs about $1.50 worth of charge a day, and for longer trips it can use gas.
As I said before, the great thing about plug-in hybrids is there's no range anxiety. You can use them as a regular internal combustion engine car, so you can go on week-long camping trips into the wilderness and not worry about there being no battery charge by the end of the week. Anyone who owns an internal combustion engine car can own a plug-in hybrid, but of course if electricity is cheaper than petrol, it's easy to run them purely as an electric vehicle. And what's more, they're even cheaper than electric vehicles. The Toyota Prius Prime with a 40-mile EV range costs $6,000 less than a VW ID4. Even though it has both an engine and batteries, it's lighter because there are fewer batteries to use, and the acceleration on both cars is pretty much the same. They're, within the 5 to 6 second range. So, it's zippy. It's not like it's not a slow car. And although it has an engine, you don't need a big V8 engine. You can use a very small, lightweight engine because all that engine's doing is charging the batteries. So it's essentially just a generator. So for example, Mazda launched the MX-30 in January 2023 with a very small, lightweight Wankel engine. Yes, Wankel engines are back. And one of the great things about Wankel engines is they're very small and compact and light. One of the problems they have is that the fuel economy isn't that great. But if you're running a Wankel engine at a constant speed, which you are if you're using it as a generator, then you can get pretty good fuel economy out of this engine. Plus, you're not using the engine all the time. You're only using it very occasionally. A lot of the time, you're running just on pure electric drivetrain. The Mazda MX-30 is also cheaper than the Volkswagen ID4, and yet it has a 100-mile electric range. So given all of this, why would I buy an electric vehicle? Why wouldn't I just go and buy a plug-in hybrid? But government legislation isn't taking this into account. For example, UK legislation outlaws even plug-in hybrids from 2035. After then, all cars will have to have zero emissions from the tailpipe. At least that's what it says in the UK legislation, even if the car, of course, doesn't actually have a tailpipe at this point. Toyota seem to feel the same way as me. They want to rename plug-in hybrids as practical electric vehicles, which I think sounds like a good way to phrase it. They are essentially practical electric vehicles. So are we overlooking plug-in hybrids because they're not as cool as EVs, or because they're not the new hotness, or because as a planet we're focusing on reversing climate change and drastic times call for drastic measures, so let's just get rid of every car that uses an internal combustion engine completely, and then we know at least we've solved that problem, and then we'll have to try and solve the infrastructure problems later on. One thing I certainly found when researching this video is certainly plug-in hybrids aren't very cool as far as the public goes, because there's not very many of them on offer, particularly in North America. I had a big problem trying to find a good selection of plug-in hybrids, and even then I found something like the Audi Q5 that claimed it was a plug-in hybrid. It has 23 miles of range. So anyway, that's the big question. Are electric vehicles a fad? Plug-in hybrids were once seen as a stepping stone along the way to electric vehicles, and maybe they will be in 50 years or more time, but in the next 20 years or so, maybe plug-in hybrids are the Swiss Army knife car that's the best of both worlds. It's a car that can drive all day as a taxi and yet still be able to charge when there's downtime. Now, full disclosure, I own an electric vehicle, a Tesla Model 3, and have done since 2019. I didn't buy it because I'm a big Tesla fanboy. I bought it partly for environmental reasons, partly because of the cool technology inside it, and partly because of the performance of it. And I love it for all of those reasons. But I'm fortunate that I can charge it overnight. I lived in an apartment in 2020 for 9 months without night charging, and it was a horrible car to have to use. I had to go over to a Tesla supercharger every so often that was down the road to be able to charge it every so often. And usually I'd have to go at night because if I went during the day, there were so many people trying to use it that I just couldn't use it. So I'd have to go there at 10 o'clock at night, go there, be typing a script or editing a video or something while the thing was charging. So I have some experience with electric vehicles, but because I live with one, I'm skeptical about mass adoption, at least with the current state of electric vehicle technology. And a plug-in hybrid seems to be the right sort of thing, and it really certainly would have helped in 2020 when I had that apartment living problem. So what do you think? Is the whole electric vehicle thing just mass hysteria? Is it a sort of an emperor's new clothes situation and someone's just going to say, hold on, this whole electric vehicle thing's a load of rubbish? Is it imperative that we move to electric vehicles for the environment and hang the cost or the inconvenience? It's just something we have to do. Are plug-in hybrids just a blind alley to getting us to fewer emissions? Will car companies have made electric vehicles completely practical in 10 years' time, and what will we all, and in 10 years' time we'll be wondering what we're all worrying about? Or are we all wrong and fuel cell technology is the way to go? Anyway, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.